Welcome to the Digital Intellect, bringing you the latest news from around the world. History is often marked by single days that change everything. These are the moments that, in hindsight, become turning points. When the world wakes up to a new reality, and nothing will ever be quite the same again. April 2nd, 2025, is now one of those days for North America. It's a date that will be remembered, not just by politicians and business leaders, but by ordinary people whose lives are shaped by the flow of energy and the tides of global trade. On that morning, the world of energy, politics, and trade shifted. The familiar patterns of supply and demand, the old alliances and rivalries, all began to realign as a new chapter opened. For decades, Canadian oil flowed south to the US, a relationship built on mutual need, but also on dependency. The pipelines that crossed the border were more than steel and oil. They were symbols of a partnership that shaped economies and policies. But on that Tuesday, a new story began, flowing west toward Asia, signaling a dramatic shift in direction and ambition. At the Westridge Marine Terminal in British Columbia, the first oil tanker, the Maple Leaf Pioneer, was loaded with Canadian crude bound for Shanghai. This marked the official launch of the expanded Trans Mountain Pipeline, the result of years of political battles, environmental debates, and national investment. It was a moment that many thought might never come, but perseverance and determination prevailed. The symbolism was clear. Canada was opening a new artery for its most valuable resource, pointing away from its oldest ally. The Pacific horizon now represented opportunity, growth, and a future less tied to a single market. The world was watching as Canada charted a new course. For generations, the US held immense leverage over Canadian oil, often dictating its price and terms. This moment was about more than economics. It was about reclaiming agency and redefining relationships on the world stage. The Trans Mountain expansion broke that monopoly, giving Canada access to global markets and fairer prices. This move was driven by economic necessity and political frustration, a bold answer to years of trade disputes with the US. It opened doors to new partnerships, diversified risk, and promised a more resilient future for Canadian energy. As the Maple Leaf Pioneer sailed, it carried more than oil. It carried Canada's ambitions for independence and prosperity. April 2nd, 2025 signaled Canada's readiness to forge its own path in global energy. It was a declaration to the world. Canada was no longer content to play a supporting role. It was ready to lead, innovate, and shape its own destiny. The Trans Mountain expansion was more than steel pipes. It tripled capacity to nearly 900,000 barrels per day. Before, Canadian oil was trapped by bottlenecks, sold at a discount to the US. The new pipeline is a superhighway to the Pacific, unlocking access to Asia. Stretching over 1,100 kilometers from Alberta to British Columbia, it overcame tough terrain and fierce opposition. Its completion is a victory for those who saw it as essential for Canada's economic sovereignty. Now, Canadian oil can be sold to any Pacific Rim country, commanding world prices and adding billions to the economy. The pipeline gives Canada flexibility to pivot trade relationships and leverage it never had before. It's a physical symbol of Canada's new, assertive role on the world stage. For decades, the US was the default and often only destination for Canadian crude. The two countries built a tightly woven energy partnership, with Canadian oil flowing south to fuel American industries, cities, and cars. This relationship was so entrenched that it shaped not just trade, but the very infrastructure and policies of both nations. This dependency shaped Canada's economy, with American refineries built specifically for Canadian oil and pipelines designed to flow south. Billions of dollars in investment and thousands of jobs depended on this cross-border energy lifeline, making the US market central to Canada's prosperity. But the US shale boom changed everything, making America a major producer and far less reliant on Canadian imports. Suddenly, the US was not just a customer but a competitor, reshaping global oil markets and forcing Canada to rethink its strategy. Cancelled projects like Keystone XL and persistent price discounts made it clear Canada needed to diversify. Political opposition and environmental concerns in the US left Canadian oil landlocked and undervalued, highlighting the risks of putting all its eggs in one basket. The Trans Mountain expansion became Canada's escape route from this dependency, offering a new path to global markets and a chance to set its own terms. By building a world-class pipeline to its own coast, Canada signaled to Washington and the world that the old rules no longer applied. Now, Canadian oil could reach Asia and beyond, opening doors to new customers and new opportunities. Canada would no longer be a passive supplier, but an active global player. Energy executives began forging new relationships, attending international conferences, and positioning Canada as a reliable source for the world's growing energy needs. The first tanker to China was the dramatic culmination of this shift, a symbol of Canada's new direction and its determination to compete on the world stage. Trade with the US will continue, but now it's a choice, not a necessity. Canada can pick its partners, negotiate better deals, and protect its own interests. Canada can negotiate from strength, both with the US and new Pacific partners. This leverage means more influence, more options, and a stronger voice in global energy discussions. This rebalancing of power will redefine the Canada-US relationship for decades, shifting the dynamics of trade, diplomacy, and energy security across the continent. The era of near-total reliance on the US is over. Canada has learned from the past and is charting a new, independent course. Canada's energy future is now in its own hands. With new infrastructure, new markets, and renewed confidence, the country is ready to shape its own destiny. The Trans Mountain expansion marks a fundamental shift in North American energy, redrawing the map and setting a new precedent for how resources move and who controls them. Canada is no longer just a junior partner, it's a global contender, ready to compete, collaborate, and lead in the world's energy future. The Trans Mountain expansion has opened a new world of opportunity for Canada, across the Pacific. Asia's booming economies, especially China and India, are hungry for energy and eager to diversify suppliers. Canada, with its stable politics and vast reserves, is the perfect partner. The arrival of Canadian crude in Shanghai is a strategic win for both nations, launching a long-term energy partnership. Shipping oil from British Columbia to Asia is faster and often cheaper than from the US Gulf Coast. Canadian producers can now bypass US pipelines and price discounts, selling at global benchmarks like Brent crude. This new Pacific trade is transformative, building deeper economic and diplomatic ties with Asia. It diversifies Canada's trade, creates jobs, and boosts revenue. By becoming a key supplier to Asia, Canada gains new influence and resilience. The flow of oil to Asia marks a new dawn for the Canadian economy. Canada's energy pivot was a direct response to escalating trade friction with the US. For decades, the United States had been Canada's primary energy customer, but that relationship was starting to show cracks. American tariffs on Canadian goods and the cancellation of Keystone XL exposed the risks of relying on a single, unpredictable partner. These events sent shockwaves through Canada's energy sector, highlighting just how vulnerable the country was to decisions made in Washington. These actions created economic uncertainty and strained the partnership. Canadian businesses and policymakers realized that their economic future could not hinge on the whims of one neighbor. For Canada, the message was clear: it needed new customers. The search for alternative markets became a national priority, sparking intense discussions at every level of government and industry. Asian demand for energy was surging, while the US was putting up barriers. Countries like China, Japan, and South Korea were hungry for reliable energy sources, and Canada saw an opportunity. The logic was simple: if your biggest buyer makes business harder, find others. Diversification wasn't just smart, it was essential for long-term stability. The Trans Mountain expansion became the solution, providing a direct route to tidewater and global markets. This project was more than just a pipeline, it was a lifeline to new possibilities. This wasn't an anti-American move, but a pro-Canadian one, de-risking the country's most important export. It was about taking control of Canada's economic destiny and reducing exposure to foreign policy shifts. US protectionism acted as a catalyst, accelerating a strategic pivot already underway. The urgency to act grew with every new trade barrier. The decision to invest in Trans Mountain was shaped by necessity and opportunity. It was a calculated move to secure Canada's place in the global energy market. Canada seized the chance to diversify, ensuring its prosperity wasn't tied to one market. This shift promised more stability and growth for future generations. The shift westward was about securing fair prices and stable partnerships. By reaching new customers, Canada could negotiate from a position of strength. The US tariffs ultimately pushed Canada to build new economic bridges to Asia. These new relationships would shape the country's economic landscape for years to come. April 2, 2025 was the result of years of calculated strategy. It marked a turning point, the culmination of careful planning and bold decisions. Canada's energy future now looks east, not just south. By embracing new markets, Canada is charting a more secure and prosperous path forward. Building the Trans Mountain expansion was a marathon of political, legal, and engineering challenges. Fierce opposition and regulatory hurdles forced the Canadian government to buy the project in 2018, declaring it a national priority. Government ownership stabilized the project, enabling construction through tough terrain and complex consultations. Thousands of workers, including many from indigenous communities, built not just a pipeline, but a new economic gateway. The investment included expanded storage in Alberta and upgrades to the Westridge Marine Terminal for massive oil tankers. The project's completion is a story of national resolve and collaboration. It shows what's possible when government and industry align on a strategic goal. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is now a permanent gateway for Canadian resources to reach Asia. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has made Canadian crude a direct competitor in Asia, challenging Middle Eastern and Russian dominance. Asian refineries now have a reliable new source for heavy oil, increasing competition and energy security. The price gap for Canadian oil has narrowed, bringing billions in new revenue and funding public services. Canada's economic and diplomatic ties with Asia are stronger, reducing vulnerability to U.S. shifts. Canada now engages the U.S. as a more balanced partner, not a dependent junior. This move has global consequences, offering Asia a stable, democratic energy supplier. Canada is now at the center of a new energy nexus, connecting North America to Asia. The ripple effects of April 2, 2025 will shape global energy for years. The Trans Mountain expansion marks a new era for Canada, one of energy security through diversity. By creating multiple export pathways, Canada is no longer at the mercy of any single partner. This is true energy independence, the ability to choose trading partners based on mutual benefit. The mega deals with Asia are just the beginning, opening doors to deeper collaboration in technology and investment. Diversification makes Canada's economy more resilient and robust. Profits from global oil sales can fund a transition to cleaner energy and innovation. The pipeline is a bridge, providing economic strength for the global energy transition. April 2, 2025, set Canada on a bold new course. Canada has asserted its sovereignty and secured its economic future. The nation is now a master of its own energy destiny, ready to lead in the 21st century.